My name is Nicholas Herman, and I'm the Lawrence J. Schoenberg Curator at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, or SIMS, here at the Penn Libraries Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books, and Manuscripts. And it's my pleasure to welcome you in person and also online to the 2025 SIMS and Herbert D. Katz Center Distinguished Fellows Lecture in Jewish Manuscript Studies, featuring Professor Sacha from University College London. The fellowship, funded in part by the David Rudderman Distinguished Scholar Fund, pairs a prominent scholar in any field of Jewish studies with a manuscript housed in our collections at Penn. The goal is to bring one distinguished scholar per year to Philadelphia to research our rich holdings in pre-modern Judaic manuscript material. As part of this initiative, fellows are asked to share their discoveries and expertise at a public lecture, tonight's event, sponsored by the Jewish Studies program at Penn. If you'd like to learn more about the Schoenberg Institute's many initiatives, including our monthly online lectures, our weekly Coffee with a Codex drop-in sessions, and our annual Schoenberg Symposium on Manuscript Studies in the Digital Age, please visit our website at schoenberginstitute.org and sign up for our monthly email list. Tonight, we gather to celebrate our 8th annual SIMS Katz Lecture with a talk dedicated to one of the Schoenberg collection's most beloved manuscripts. The star of tonight's show is LJS 57, a 14th century astronomical atlas written in Hebrew and produced in mid-14th century Catalonia. The manuscript continues to fascinate audiences 7 centuries after its production, as witnessed by its recent presence in 2 major museum exhibitions. The Sassoons, held at the Jewish Museum in New York in 2023, which gathered many of the fantastic objects once owned by this great collecting dynasty, including this very manuscript, and also more recently in the exhibition Lumen, the Art and Science of Light, held at the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles last fall, in which our LJS 57 manuscript shared a case with one of the earliest known astrolabes to feature Judeo-Arabic script, which was on loan from the collections of the British Museum. Exhibiting our manuscripts to broad audiences through exhibitions and focusing scholarly attention on them through events like tonight's lecture are a key part of SIM's mission to bring people, technology, and manuscripts together. But before we formally introduce tonight's speaker, I'd like to call upon my colleague, Natalie Dorman, Associate Director of the Katz Center, to say a few more words of welcome. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be introducing our speaker, not directly introducing our speaker tonight, but be part of welcoming to the 8th annual SIMS Katz Lecture in Hebrew Manuscript Studies. This is a really, really exciting collaboration between the 2 institutions. We bring these scholars, and SIMS brings the manuscripts, and it's always a beautiful marriage, and I expect another to happen tonight. So I don't have much to add to the details of except to thank some of the same people, to thank SIM so much for the partnership, especially tonight, Lynn Ransom, who really carried so much water for this event. Our 3rd musketeer since the very beginning, Arthur Curon. I want to thank Katie Maxwell for her contribution and her artistic eye to the event, and also to thank the David Ruderman Distinguished Visiting Scholar Fund for supporting the event. We also couldn't do it at all without the generous material and intellectual support of the Jewish Studies program. So it's really a team effort tonight. Let's see. I also wanted to say that because Professor Stern is the 8th, there are 7 others, and the manuscripts they have opened up to us in extraordinarily surprising ways. These lectures are all recorded on our YouTube channel. So if you ever go to the Katz Center website and do a click or 2, you can find a channel dedicated to the SIMS Katz lectures, and they're all marvelous, every one. And they can send you back to the full digitized manuscripts that are in our collections, and they're linked there. So please do so. Please explore a little bit. Anything else to cover? All right, people. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn over to Professor Simcha Gross of the Department of Middle Eastern Languages and Cultures to introduce our speaker tonight, the man from whom you have come here to learn. Simcha is a restless scholar of many things. He's going to have many connections with Professor Stern. We're just happy to celebrate his prize-winning superb 2024 monograph, Babylonian Jews and Sasanian Imperialism, Late Antiquity. And with that, Simcha.
It is a true honor to introduce our speaker this evening, Professor Sacha Stern, though I must apologize in advance for my inevitable failure to do so adequately. I'm not simply peddling in the trope of false modesty, but instead admitting that the task is simply impossible to complete in the minimal time allotted to me. My remit, after all, is to convey the speaker's importance in order to explain why he deserves your full and undivided attention. But as medieval epiphatic philosophers cautioned, the attempt to enumerate attributes can often fall short, and in this case, certainly will. Let me explain. Not to age Sacha, but I've been reading his work since I was an undergraduate, and I continue to do so whenever he publishes something new. Of course, I've read the work of many scholars over the past few decades, but what is distinct about Sacha is that as my own interests evolve, I consistently find that he has already written a seminal piece on the very subject I'm exploring, an always inspiring and yet sometimes frustrating revelation. When I considered writing a dissertation on the Babylonian Talmud's distinctive conception of the non-Jew, there was Sacha's excellent book on rabbinic identity. When I turned to the social history of the rabbinic movement, Sacha's path-breaking article on the patriarch was waiting. A more nuanced account of the rise of rabbinic academies, Sacha got there first. Rabbinic attitudes towards idolatry, you get the point. Yet Sacha's publications are more than just a testament to his incredibly capacious interests and productivity, but signal the remarkable breadth and depth of his scholarship. Sacha is among the rare few who can navigate ancient and medieval Jewish history with equal mastery and dexterity. And even with that diachronic scope, his expertise in Jewish history is always positioned in conversation with broader historical currents that extend well beyond Jewish contexts. Nowhere is this clearer than in his path-breaking research on the calendar, a subject that spans millennia of history, traverses nearly the entire geographic expanse of Europe, North Africa, and the Near East, and engages so many languages that it puts us all to shame. His work has not only illuminated the particular evolution of the idiosyncratic Jewish calendar, but also the broader history of ancient timekeeping, which he examines through a comparative and historical lens. Like his other work, Sacha's publications on the calendar challenge the hyper-specialized and often parochial approaches all too common in many fields, Jewish studies among them, offering an alternative model of historical development that is contextual, vibrant, and dynamic. Yet no matter the scope of his interests, Sacha always approaches them with the rigor and precision of a philologist, building tapestries with attention to each minute thread. This is evident, for instance, in his relatively recent book on the early 10th century Jewish calendrical controversy, in which he included editions of neglected manuscripts from the Cairo Geniza, in the process revising our understanding of this critical episode. Throughout his career then, Sacha has demonstrated a deep commitment to understanding how Jews and Jewish texts engage with their larger context, social, cultural, and political contexts, and indeed how Jewish history is indispensable for comprehending the broader historical landscapes in which Jews participated. Along the way, he has accumulated a staggering number of awards and fellowships, which I simply do not have time to list, hence my apologies at the outset. It is serendipitous, kismet, and bashert, then, that Sacha will be speaking today about a manuscript in Penn's collection that similarly resists simple description or categorization. This compendium of astronomical and scientific texts attributed to various Jewish luminaries is not only richly illustrated, but also contains a Hebrew calendar that exhibits an unexpected and profound engagement with the Christian liturgical cycle. We are therefore in for a treat as we learn about a truly unique and multifaceted manuscript from a truly unique and multifaceted scholar. Please join me in welcoming Professor Sacha Stern.
Thank you, everyone, for this glorious introduction. You don't have to believe everything Simcha said, but what I would like to do is to invite you to enjoy with me this amazing manuscript that I'm going to be talking about. That's all I ask of you tonight. But first of all, thank you very much to both the Sims and Lynn Ransom for organizing this fellowship and inviting me, and on the Cat Center side, Natalie Dorman and Arthur Curon for really putting your trust in me. And it wasn't obvious at first that it was going to work out. It took us a bit of a while to home in on what I was going to do. But anyway, LJS 57 is a magnificently produced manuscript. It's beautiful. We'll see images, it's just mind-boggling. And yet, at the same time, the text in the manuscript is dry, scientific, and boring. So what I'd like to do to try and explore this contrast between the richness of the illustrations, and you can see some of them already on this slide, and the dryness of the text. Is the artwork an attempt to liven up the science? Or in reverse, is the science a framework for artistic creativity? Well, this codex produced 4 scientists, you know, as a sort of data bank for astronomers, astrologers maybe to use. And then one has to ask, well, if that's the case, why did they need all the illustrations? Or was this book produced for book lovers? And then one has to ask, why is it so full of scientific data, which would have been quite irrelevant to them? Dating saints. What is this title about? Well, in the second part of the talk, I will be looking at a section of the codex which presents a fascinating Christian calendar, Christian liturgical calendar, in Hebrew, of course, complete with feast days and saint days, and which opens a window on Jewish engagement with Christianity in 14th century Spain. Okay, right. So LJS 57 was formerly in the collection of David Solomon Sassoon in Letchworth, not so far from where I live. And eventually it was acquired by Lawrence Schoenberg, and he then donated the manuscript to UPenn Library in 2013. The date of the manuscript is 1391. I know the catalogue says 1361, but that's a mistake. It's 1391. And here you've got a summary of the contents. So, number 1, a treatise on solar and lunar astronomy with eclipse tables for 1361 to 1391. The catalogue, the library catalogue says treatise on calendar and leap years, which is wrong. It's not my intention to tread on libraries, but cataloging errors are very common in my experience, particularly in this kind of field. And it's not anyone's fault, it's just because library catalogers don't know the subject, so they don't know what they're looking at. So yeah, something to do with leap years, calendars, whatever. Okay, it's actually solar and lunar astronomy, and it's about eclipses. You know, all I want to do is try and correct the catalogue constructively. I'm not trying to, score points here. Right. Number 2, a number of astrological works by Abraham ibn Ezra, who is quite well known as a biblical commentator, but was also an accomplished astrologer. He believed in astrology, as many scientists in the Middle Ages did, and I dare say some still do today. And here are some of his works, which are known also from other manuscripts. Number 3 is a very short 2-pager called Ptolemy's Book of Elections. In the library catalogue, it says it's a Hebrew translation of the Almagest, which is totally impossible. This is a unique work. We don't know exactly what it is. Most likely not Ptolemy's, but it's some sort of medieval astrological text. Number 4, we'll come back to that one later. That's a liturgical calendar in Hebrew. And then we have tables in section 5, and you'll notice from the page numbers that they are in disorder. That's one of the features of the manuscript, that it hasn't been bound completely correctly. Number 6, a further table, Number 7, the drawing of a back of an astrolabe. These are just single pages. Then number 8, celestial maps. So we'll have a look at those later. That's 2 pages. And then the star catalogue, which is a very substantial part of the manuscript and which is illuminated. And again, we'll have opportunity to talk quite a lot about that. And then finally, more astronomical tables, Don Pedro and Abraham Bachaya. Now, there is another manuscript, not here, but in Vienna, Hebrew 132, which looks very much like a duplicate codex to the one that we have. It's almost identical in contents, in handwriting, in layout, in illustrations, everything really. You can see here 2 pages, one from Vienna, the other from LJS 57, and they're exactly the same really. The contents of the Vienna is a little bit more restricted. There are only 2 works of Abraham ibn Ezra, the Judgment of the Zodiac Signs, which is also in the one here, and another work called the Book of Reasons, which we don't have in our manuscript here, but I'm thinking that perhaps it was at one time and it's gone missing, quite possible. Christian liturgical Hebrew, calendar in Hebrew, but only for the months of July to October, and then tables and a star catalogue. Altogether, it's a shorter manuscript, what is it suggesting? What can we learn out from this? It looks like we have here not just one, but several copies of exactly the same manuscript, which indicates that this manuscript was part of a large-scale production. It wasn't the work of an individual scribe working on his own, but this was an enterprise, a commercial operation. Each of these manuscripts, the one here and the one there, are written in several hands. So it's not just one scribe, but it's a few scribes sharing the work. And the whole thing must have been run with significant financial resources. The fact that the Vienna manuscript is made up of loose pages, bound in complete disorder and very incomplete, raises in my mind the likelihood that actually it never ended up as a book. It never was intended as a book. In other words, these are pages. What you have in Vienna are pages which were like leftovers of the production line of the factory that was producing these copy manuscripts, and never actually made it into a codex. It just ended up as loose pages, and somebody somewhere along the line picked them up, and then they got bound eventually and ended in the library in Vienna. I don't know exactly the story of how all this happened. But in connection with this, we note that the Vienna manuscript is actually better preserved than the one that's here. Better preserved in the sense that the ink is better preserved, it's more legible. I don't know if it's obvious from the 2 images you can see here on the screen, but we might have a few examples later on also. Oh, that's a shame. The one here isn't so well preserved. Just a minute. Why is the one in Vienna better preserved? Because it never was a book. It was just loose pages which were sort of shoved away somewhere in a drawer and that nobody ever used. Whereas the book here was a book, and it was used, and there are signs of use. And although the ink is beginning to wear off, and I think there might be an issue of conservation here that the library could perhaps think a little bit about. I don't know what can be done about it. There is wear and tear to the manuscript here, but I feel there is also more life to it, because it's a book which was used by actual people through the centuries. So that's the way I look at it anyway. Okay, good. Now, just going back, I warned you already that the contents of this book are very boring. They really are boring. I mean, even for someone like me, I'm interested in astronomy, but just these tables of, it's like a data dump. That's what it looks like. If you look at item 10, you've got the astronomical tables there. They run from page 147 to page 228. That's almost half the book. So almost half the book is not any of the illustrations you saw on the title page, but it's just boring tables with numbers. And there are also tables elsewhere in the. So basically, more than half the manuscript is made up of this boring or seemingly boring material. So here's an example of what I call a boring table. Now, of course, it's very useful for somebody who wants to calculate the calendar new moon, the molad. This is a really useful resource, but it's not anything anyone would pick up and read. It's not what you would do with this. And the presentation isn't too exciting, but there are a few cases where the scribe has exercised a bit of creativity, to lay out his material. So this is quite a nice one. And here are a few other nice examples. So on the left-hand side, you've got a very well-designed chart. It's very well drawn. The circles are very precise. And there is a use of colors, which is interesting. You have dark brown and red, not sure exactly. Okay, brown or maybe dark red, and okay, this sort of hues of red and brown. And in the table on the right-hand side, again, you have red and brown in alternation. The color, I think, is primarily designed to facilitate reading. It's easier to spot a column when you know that you're looking at the reds or at the browns. You don't get mixed up as you go down the columns. So it's really for utilitarian purpose rather than any artistic sort of effect. But still, all this demonstrates the effort and expense that went into the production of this manuscript. Because a scribe could equally have done the whole thing in black. It would have been easier. So a lot of work has gone into this codex. It's a shame that we don't have it here. I'd like to be able to hold it up and show it to you. Oh, maybe. Okay, good. Now, the use of color is also evident in text, but I mean, in other words, in prose passages of the manuscript. Here you've got, I'm blowing up the middle part of it. You see that in the center, basically the whole page is written in brown, but in the center of the page, you've got a line of black, and then on either side of the black, a line of red. So it has no inherent meaning, it's just a nice sort of use of colors, and it runs consistently through the whole treatise. This is a treatise of, this is the first treatise, yes, the one about solar and lunar theory. So again, it shows that the scribe has taken care to make this a beautiful book. And as you've got the blow up in front of you, those of you who know Hebrew will be able to see that the script is what we would call cursive, or some people would call it semi-cursive, whatever this means, but it is a very neat script. It's very tidy, it's very well written. Basically, no expense was spared in producing this manuscript. But where the codex really begins to shine is halfway through the book, where the star catalogue begins. So as you see from the full page on the left-hand side, the artwork, miniatures, is interwoven with astronomical data. See here sort of exemplification of the boring material with the artistic material all in one page. And the miniatures are really very intricate. They use many different hues of gold, green, gray, brown, and red. Really very impressive use of many different colors. And I'm showing you the boat, the ship on the right-hand side. This is one of my favorite illustrations in the manuscript because the level of detail is just staggering. You must, of course, remember this is a blown-up version of what it looks like in the actual manuscript. It's relatively small in the manuscript, but a huge amount of fine detail has gone into this ship, even when astronomy would not really have required it. So the way it works is that, if I can point, so these balls there, see these circles, represent stars. And the idea of a constellation is that a group of stars is interpreted, of course, it's not what you see in the sky, but it's an interpretation. It's interpreted as being part of some sort of figure of one kind or another. Here it's a ship. What's important for the astronomer is the stars that are in it. The ship itself is quite irrelevant, and as I say, all the the way the sails are depicted and all that is what I would call artistic rather than anything to do with astronomy. Looking at these circles, these stars, you will notice that some of them, I'm going to be pointing at the right one. This one here is surrounded with a black line, and this one with a black line. They don't all have that. I think these black circles are a later addition. There is evidence in this manuscript of touching up at a later stage, and sometimes it's just a case of going over the writing because the red or brown ink has faded and someone has gone over with a black pen. There are many places like that. And over here, possibly that, or just an attempt to try and enhance. Here we are. This one and that one. He hasn't done it with, whoever's done this hasn't done this with all the circles here. They are not surrounded with a black line. So I don't know exactly what, or what basis this was done. And something else I want to show you, which is like maybe trivial, but for me this is really interesting. But can you see these grid lines here? There's a line going down here. Like that, yes? You see the two grid lines, and you've got them here also. A line here and a line here. And it's all part of a framework. Now, this frame permeates the whole manuscript. Wherever you go in the manuscript, you have this frame. And the author of the manuscript has sort of worked his way around the frame. So I'm going back. So you've got, it's not so visible here, but you've got basically two columns of text which are framed by the same, the same principle of two lines running down the center. Here, if you look at the circle also, you see there's this two vertical lines which have been incorporated into the circle. So, these are like details, but it gives the manuscript coherence, and again, it shows, the thought that has been invested in the creation of this. Let's go back to where we are. Right, so now I would like to move on to the first page of the star catalogue. It starts with Polaris, which is the northern star. I suppose that's a logical place for a star catalogue to start from. Polaris is part of the constellation known as the Small Bear. So this is a small bear. I think sometimes in English it's called Dipper and Plough and all sorts of different names, which just remind us that these images are imaginary. Yes, it's a bear, it's a plough, it's whatever it is. Yeah, a chariot in Near Eastern ancient sources. That's a more normal sort of designation of it. Here also you see that the stars have been surrounded with a black circle. And this is actually interesting because you've got black circle, black, 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 and here no black. Why is there no black here? Well, actually, this star here is an outlier. It is literally an outlier because it's not part of the Bear, and actually it's not really part of the constellation of the Bear. Constellation of the Bear is meant to have only 4 stars in a kind of square, and then going into the tail 3 stars, and the large Bear also same configuration. So there's this extra one here. I don't think it's a mistake, although I'm not really sure what star it refers to. When you go down the list here, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, in this table, he describes the 7 stars of the small Bear. There is no 8th star. And so you can now understand why whoever went over the image with a black pen selected the 7 ones that truly belong to the Bear and did not circle the last one, perhaps on the assumption that it was an error or didn't really belong there. At the top of the page, we have the introduction to the star catalogue. And here is a translation of it. Positions of the fixed stars in longitude and latitude from the circle of the zodiac. Actually, it's a lot more than the circle of the zodiac because Polaris and the small Bear are quite a long way from the zodiac. At the beginning of the year 1391, this is what enables us to date the codex to this year. Because on the assumption that the year you're going to take as a paradigm is the year that you're writing in. So at the beginning of the year 1391 from the incarnation, which is the year 793 according to the reckoning of the Hegarians, or Hegira. I think the Hebrew means both, really. Hegarians means of Hagar, means the Ishmaelites. The Arabs, in other words, the Muslims. And the year 5152 from the creation. Note the religious neutrality of this dating, because no Jew would believe that there really was an incarnation. Yeah, but this is not the place for a theological debate. It's a scientific book, so who cares really? And also notice that he first puts down the Christian date and leaves the Jewish one to the end. Again, theological preferences or niceties are not really part of the game here. This is a work of astronomy. Now, as I said before, 1391 is presumably the date when this manuscript was produced, and you have the same date in the equivalent page in the Vienna manuscript. So you can see the factory was at work in that year. And what's really interesting for those of you who know Spanish Jewish history is that 1391 is precisely the year of the great pogroms against the Jews, probably the worst year for the entire history of the Jews in Spain, arguably even worse in 1492. Major pogroms, and one wonders what's going on here. So the pogroms began in June, in the month of June. So it could be argued that all these manuscripts were produced earlier on in the year and nobody knew what was coming. But I don't know, maybe they were produced even while the pogroms were going on. And I wonder, I think it's really tantalizing, actually. The date of this manuscript is really tantalizing. Whatever we make of it, I find it eerie that, such a rich, expensive set of manuscripts, the one here, the other ones which were presumably produced at the same time, were all happening precisely at this moment. Right. Now, before the star catalogue, we have what are called celestial maps. Yeah, these are perhaps the most famous illustrations of the codex. They represent sky views. In other words, what constellations you see when you look at the sky. You don't really see any of this, but what you should be imagining when you look at the sky. And it's the northern hemisphere on the right and the southern hemisphere on the left. Northern hemisphere means north of the celestial equator. I'm not going to explain to you what this means, but the polar star is in the middle, yes, so Polaris is going to be somewhere in the middle of the diagram, and you can see the little bear is over here. And the zodiac circle will be nearer to the equator, so it will be more on the outside of the map. And on the left-hand side is the southern hemisphere, and as you can see straight away, the center of it is blank, simply because people living in Spain in the 14th century didn't have a clear idea of what the sky looked like around the South Pole. There wasn't easy access, so that part is left blank. These maps have been studied by others, more expert than myself, who came to the conclusion that there is actually no parallel to these maps, either in Arabic astronomical texts or in Latin astronomical texts. So it looks like this is a very original creation. I don't call it Jewish because there's nothing specifically Jewish about it, but it is something original which was not taken from anywhere else. What's the point of these maps? Well, they serve as a sort of reference point for the star catalogue, because in the star catalogue you have the small bear, and then you have the big bear, and then you've got different, zodiac signs, and they're all sort of on separate pages. But you want to get an idea of how they are positioned in relation to one another. So if you look at here, you'll be able to see that, the small bear is here, but the big bear is there. So that's the relationship that they are in, and, sort of figure things out on that sort of basis. But the truth is that it's not entirely consistent, because the illustrations that you have here are not the same as the illustrations in the catalogue. And in particular, the ship. This is the ship here, and if you remember, the ship in the catalogues looked very, very different. So I'm not sure, I don't think that they necessarily worked together when they produced this illustration and the ones in the catalogue. And this illustration actually doesn't strike as very scientific. Why is it not very scientific? First of all, there are no stars. Now, the artist could easily have put in the circles, little circles for stars, could easily have inserted them here and here, and, in the different constellations. It wouldn't have costed, it might have costed a bit, but it wouldn't have been a problem to do that. But no, they're not there. There aren't any stars. Maybe the artist felt that the stars would spoil the picture, but then you have this problem of the tension, is this science or is this art? The positions also aren't very accurate. So the small bear is actually in the wrong place, because his tail should hit the polar star. The polar star should be here in the center, and his tail is going in that direction. And I think probably what's happened is that it got a bit too crowded in the middle, and the artist couldn't fit everything in. So there's a sort of lack of precision, which suggests a certain tension between the constraints of astronomical accuracy, scope for imagination, a lot of imagination here, and the demands of artistic execution. But at all events, it is very clear that this scientific codex is opening up opportunities for artistic expressions within certain constraints. And I'm not going to elaborate on this because history of art is not my field, or art in general is not my field. But I think one can certainly agree that one of the ways that art produces, one of the ways that creative art thrives is by working against constraints. So it sort of sets certain constraints and then works against them. And that's how you get a sort of dialectical production of creativity. So I think this is a little bit what's going on over here. And now, without further ado, we move over to the less spectacular part of the manuscript, the tables. And I told you that tables are boring, but this, wow, this is not going to be boring at all. Christian liturgical calendar in Hebrew, which immediately raises all sorts of questions. What do you mean, Hebrew? Why? Christian liturgical? Was a Jew interested in this? Right. Let's go slowly. Let's go slowly. This calendar is a very, very rich text, just like the rest of the manuscript is extremely rich. And I feel in giving this lecture, I was preparing the lecture, I felt, it's going to be as much a question of what I shouldn't be saying as what I should be saying, because there's just not enough time to cover it. But let's try and get a general sense, first of all, of what's going on. The Christian liturgical calendar in Hebrew begins in folio 95 with the month of March. March in medieval Europe was very commonly the beginning of the year. Different cities and states and countries ran their calendar differently, but it was very normal to start the year in March in very many countries. So, okay, I've got no problem with the calendar starting in March. My problem is that it goes up to December and then stops. And very suspiciously, there is a blank page there in the codex. I think maybe the scribe forgot that he had to go back to January and February. I think. It's not in character because it's such a well-produced manuscript, but it is a bit weird that those two pages are missing in the blank page. Okay. So let's understand first how this calendar is constructed. I'm just going to show you now a few features, and then we'll see some more detail later on. So at the top, we have March has 31 days, and also March is in Nisan. Nisan is a Hebrew month, so you see immediately there is a Jewish element here, or there is an attempt to bring the Christian calendar in relation with the Jewish one. Although it's a little bit deceptive because later on we'll look at Latin calendars, Latin liturgical calendars, and they also mention the lunar month. So it's not specifically Jewish, it's actually also a Christian interest. But never mind. Right, so that's one thing. Then you've got in the first column the days of the month. So that runs from 1 all the way down to 31 at the bottom. Here you have the saint days, that's on the column on the far left. Every saint is introduced with the letter sin, which stands for sant or santa in Catalan. I don't know Catalan, but I'm getting away with it. Yeah, I'm pretending that I know Catalan. Okay, good. You have also 7 columns there, which represent 7 weekdays. So what it means is that, in theory, every day in March, each day in March, rather, could fall on any day of the week. So what is represented here are 7 columns with all 7 options. It seems a bit like overkill, but this is what you've got over here. And in the Vienna manuscript, you've got exactly the same thing. So as I said before, it's exactly the same manuscript. So exactly the same thing, the same data, everything is exactly the same. Except that it's better preserved. You might see this also, that the Vienna page is better preserved than the one here is more smudged, is more sort of worn. But there is one big difference, and that's that in the Vienna manuscript, the column for the saints is vacant. And this is really interesting because it suggests that this type of calendar was constructed in stages. So first the scribes prepare a certain number of columns, and then somebody else comes in later to put in the relevant saint days. And in this case, in the case of Vienna, it simply didn't happen, which reinforces a little bit what I was saying before, that really they're just draft pages or pages which were in the end not used, not finalized and not used. Our calendar is not unique. There are other Christian liturgical calendars in Hebrew from the same period, the 14th and 15th century. This one is dated 1399, so it's almost exactly the same date as our manuscript. And the manuscript is associated or mentions Montargis, which is a locality not so far from Paris, which would give us an idea of the identity of the scribe. But in 1399, this was after the exile of Jews from France. So most likely it was composed somewhere in exile, maybe in southern France, although the author still identifies, of course, as French, and everything in this manuscript is French. So the saint days here are introduced with the Hebrew letter Kuf, which stands for Kadosh. So actually here it's been translated into Hebrew. It's not the French word for saint, but it's a Hebrew word. And you have also the 7 columns for the weekdays, very typical. And here is another one. This one is made of chirogneser fragments, which I was able to piece together. It's undatable, but presumably from the same period. Looks to be like it's coming from the same period. And again, a very similar layout, 7 weekday columns, saint days, etc. What is interesting about these calendars, of course, they do share all similar features, but what to me is interesting is identifying their regional peculiarities. This particular calendar that we have here can be identified as coming from southern France, or a region that we could loosely call Provence, because it mentions local saints. So you've got Saint Aphrodite de Béziers. Béziers is a major city with a major Jewish community, medieval Jewish community in southern France. And Saint Eutrope de Sainte, which is, I don't think, associated with a specific Jewish community. It's in southwestern France. So it's not because it's anything to do with Jews, but because whoever produced this calendar was in that part of the world, in southern France, and is therefore listing saints which are local. And we'll soon see that our calendar has features that are specific to Catalonia. We'll come to this very soon. Besides reflecting local or regional saint days, it's very clear that the Christian liturgical calendars in Hebrew were actually based on Christian Latin models. And in some of the manuscripts that we have, the scribe explicitly acknowledges, I copied this from a Christian manuscript or from a Latin manuscript. The tradition of Latin Christian liturgical calendars goes back to the early Middle Ages. I'm thinking aloud now, but I think we have manuscripts from the 7th and 8th centuries. They have a very early history. And as you go around libraries in the world, there are hundreds and probably thousands of such calendars, including some in this very library here, which I guess I could have selected, but I wanted to show you this one because it's very famous and it's very beautiful. Yes, so it's from Paris. It's called the Brevière de Belleville. And what you'll see is that It has a very similar layout to ours, except that it goes from left to right, of course, because it's in Latin and not in Hebrew. And it has similar contents. So it has a column for the day of the month. It has a column, a wider column for the feast days, the saint days. It has also something called the golden number. We have it in our calendar. We'll come back to this soon. The golden number is a system to indicate the beginning of the lunar month, but I'll explain this later on. This particular example has the distinction of being richly illustrated, and I just want to draw your attention to the image at the bottom of the calendar, which is actually a disputation between a Jew and a Christian. And it's a cartoon. So here we are in the month of December. So this is a final scene, but it's a cartoon that starts in January, and then you follow the story. And basically, as you go through the months of the year, the Christian, I don't know if he's a bishop or a saint or whatever, an apostle or whatever, is arguing with the Jew. And the final scene is that the temple or the synagogue of the Jew crashes down, and is finally defeated. This is just, all this is really completely in brackets, but I think this cartoon shows how important Jews were to Christians in the Middle Ages, because this disputation between a Jew and Christian had nothing to do with the calendar. What's it doing here? Really nothing to do. It's just, because these disputations are important to Christians, if they're looking for a theme to illustrate, they got a blank space in their calendar, why not put in a disputation between a Jew and a Christian? It's an interesting observation in brackets. Anyway, what we learned from looking at this is that the Christian calendars in Hebrew are not just a textual translation into Hebrew of the contents of the calendars, but also a replication, one could call it a translation, of the graphic layout of the way it's presented. And there's a lot more to be said about this, because Jewish calendars in the Middle Ages were never presented like that. They were always presented just as prose text, and that's for a separate discussion altogether. But when it comes to producing a Christian calendar in Hebrew, then you copy the layout of Christian calendars. There is one difference in terms of the layout, and this is that in the Christian Latin version, there is only a single column for weekdays, and they are indicated with the letters A to G. In the Jewish version, you've got 7 columns. I said it was a bit overdone. 7 columns with all the 7 different possibilities. Here you have just one column with the letters A to G, where the letters A to G are neutral. They don't represent specific days of the week. It's not like A is always Sunday and etc. They are neutral, and they can be used according to circumstances. If it so happens that this year, the first day of the month, I'm trying to look, yes, it starts with F. So December starts with the letter F. So F in one year could be Monday, and then you know that all the F's in the calendar are going to be Mondays, that sort of thing. So it's a neutral system. It goes back actually to Roman calendars in antiquity, and it's a different system for indicating the day of the week. I'm saying all this because we'll understand a bit later why it's important. In 2016, I wrote an article entitled Christian Calendars in Medieval Hebrew Manuscripts, where I brought together all the evidence I could find of such calendars in medieval manuscripts, and they are listed here. There's a list of 10 altogether, all dating from the 14th, from the late 13th century to the early 16th century. And what I found is that all these manuscripts were either French or German, except for the Cairo-Gnize, the one that we saw before, which is Southern French, but even that could well be post-expulsion and really coming from people in northern France, as was often the case in later medieval Provence. After publishing the article, I discovered another one in the Bodleian in Oxford, and so I'm adding it to the list. Again, German. The conclusion that I was led to in this article was that this was a specifically Northern European Jewish phenomenon, that the translation and the production of Christian calendars in Hebrew, whatever it responded to, was specific to French and German Jews. Now that I found, just only a few weeks ago, this example in a Catalonian manuscript here at UPenn demonstrates, basically makes me revise my theory and demonstrates that similar calendars must have also been produced in Iberia and was basically more widespread in Western Europe than I originally thought. In this article, I asked the very important question, why Christian calendars in Hebrew? And the main answer, very simply, is that knowledge of the Christian calendar, of the Julian months, of the liturgical days, was essential for commercial life, for people living in Christian societies. If you're a businessman and you're doing deals with Christians, if you're drawing up contracts, if you're lending them money, if you're attending market days, which are usually held on Christian feasts or on saint days, you need to know the Christian calendar. This is essential knowledge. And this is why, this is a principal reason why these calendars appear in all these manuscripts. But in addition to that, I suggested that there might be a general interest in Christian liturgy and also an opportunity to mock it. And I'll show you examples later on in our Catalonian manuscript of mockery of Christian feast days. Besides that, the astronomical data that comes in some of these calendars would have been useful to Jews. So we have to remember then the Jewish calendar is lunar, the Christian calendar is solar, and things like zodiac signs can be basically can be fitted into a solar calendar, but can't really be fitted into a lunar one. So having the availability of a Christian calendar enables a Jew to identify or plot the times of zodiac signs, which can be quite useful for all sorts of reasons. Also medical information, so quite a few of these calendars, this connects with the Cat Center theme, yeah? Yeah, thank you. Medical information which we find in these manuscripts, such as regimen, what foods you should be eating at various times of the year. These are seasonal phenomena which, again, fit well into a solar calendar, not so lunar one. And then there are also solar dates in the Jewish calendar, for instance, example, the prayer for rain, the Tkufot. I'm not going to elaborate on this, but there are all sorts of other uses that Jews could have had of these calendars. Okay, let's now come back to our manuscript and have a close-up. I'm now looking at the month of December. Now, you will notice that it's divided into two sections, and as I told you before, the entire manuscript is structured with these two lines in the middle, so we end up with one half here and one half there. And there is a bit of a repetition because of this sort of, these two tables repeat themselves. Whoa, what's happened here? Oh, hold on. Both sides have the day of the month. So it's a repetition. Why? I don't know. Maybe because it's easier to have the days, the numbers of the month repeated further on in the table. But what I would like to suggest is that what the scribe has tried to create here is two different sections, one Christian and one Jewish. When I say Jewish, I don't mean Jewish, it's still ultimately a Christian calendar, but the section on the right-hand side is sort of a bit more Jewish or a bit Judaized, where the one on the left is Christian. So on the Jewish side, what do we have? We have 7 weekday columns, which is specific to Christian calendars in Hebrew, whereas on the Christian side, you've got the Christian method, which is lettering the days of the week from A to G. Our scribe had a problem. He didn't want to write down Latin letters. It's a Hebrew manuscript. So he couldn't write A to G. And he didn't want to write Aleph, Bet letters because, I don't know, that might be confusing or whatever. What he's done instead is to vocalize the letters as they would be pronounced in Catalan. I don't know exactly how the letters of the alphabet are pronounced in Catalan, but you've got, A, B, C, D. This should be the F is the problem. F, G. Yeah. Letters of the alphabet. Right. On the Christian side, we have the golden number, which we saw also in the Latin calendar. So that indicates the beginning of lunar months. What it means is that, okay, so the lunar calendar is important for Christians because it is a basis of the date of Easter. Okay, so and it's structured, the lunar calendar for Christians and for Jews is structured in a 19-year cycle. So what this is telling us is that this is letter Yod, which stands for 10. In the 10th year of the lunar cycle, the lunar month will begin on the 4th of December. Or in the 18th year of the lunar cycle, the lunar month will begin on the 6th of December, and so on. It's a system which is known as the golden number. And we have a golden number also on the Jewish side, but it has been Judaized. Meaning what? The one on the left is the golden number of the Christian calendar, the one that regulates the date of Easter. The one on the right is basically a representation of the Jewish calendar. So the dates are completely different. For the 4th of December, instead of having number 10, you've got number 16, which means that it's in the 16th year of the cycle that the Jewish month starts on the 4th of December. And basically, what we have here is a system which is of Christian origin, which has been adopted or appropriated by the Jewish scribe and turned to the use of Jews, made useful for the needs of Jewish readers. It enables, in this case, the conversion of Jewish dates into Christian dates, or vice versa. So this is a way in which a Christian tradition is being exploited by a Jew for specifically Jewish advantages. In addition, on the Christian side of the calendar is the Roman date. I don't know if I'll have time to explain this, but maybe afterwards. And then there is the liturgical dates. Okay, this is St. Nicholas on the 6th of December, those of you who know the liturgical calendar. And the author actually knows quite a bit about the Christian calendar, because on the 13th of December he says, Saint Lucia, and the next Wednesday will be Ember Days, Temporis. That's how he renders it as Temporis. I haven't seen this in German or French calendars. It really shows a high level of understanding of how the Christian calendar works. If you don't know what Ember Days are, Google. Now, the word temporis is transliterated into Hebrew letters, but there are instances where the word has been translated. So, for example, for the 6th of May, we have Sant Juan. I don't know if that's how Catalan is pronounced nowadays, but Sant Juan So the Latin word is Apporta Latina, so from the Latin of the Latin gate. I don't know what it means, but that's the name of the feast, and it's been translated Char Latina into Hebrew. Or Santa Fe the Virgin on the 6th of October. Santa Fe in the Hebrew, and then Betula, which is a Hebrew word for virgin. We also have a bit of mockery. So we are now in December. The 24th of December is Ta'anit, that's the fast, the vigil. That's very standard in all these calendars. 25th is Nadal, note the Catalan word for Christmas. And then on the 26th, which is Saint Stephen, there we have San Esteves, Saint Stephen, killed, harug, in French. I think this is meant as a mockery because first of all, it's not part of the official Christian name. In Christian calendars, it's never, it's just called Saint Stephen. That's all it is. And if a Christian wanted to reflect on the fact that Saint Stephen was killed, as we see in the beginning of the book of Acts, he would have said martyred, or maybe stoned, which wasn't killed, I think, is pejorative. Here's another one, the Assumption of Mary. On the 15th of August, so in Christian tradition, on the 15th of August, Mary went up to heaven, yes? He says here, Assumption of Mary, Pirush Mitata, meaning her death. Yeah, so Christians think that she sort of became immortal and went up into heaven. What it really means is that she died. And here I had a lot of trouble reading this. This is the 25th of March, which is the conception of Mary, the Annunciation, two different ways of referring to the same event. And I had a lot of trouble reading what it actually said. There's something here going on, but I couldn't read it. But the reason why I couldn't read it is that somebody has covered the text with blobs of ink. Yes, it's not a coincidence. It's precisely here that you have all these little blobs. It could be a Jew who did this, a Christian owner, or maybe even a Jew who did it. It could even be that it was done at the time when the manuscript was produced. A scribe wrote something and then another one came and said, oh no, you can't do that. And he tried to erase it, although he didn't fully erase it. He made it possible to read between the blobs, although I had trouble doing that. Maybe someone can do better than I did. I have no idea what he wrote about the conception, but I'll leave that to your imagination. Here we have local saints. So here, this is a local Catalonian element. I'm not going to read all this. You've got it here in front of you, and I know that we're in a rush to finish off. But these are all local saints specifically to Girona, which is one of the main towns of Catalonia. Majorca is not far from Catalonia, same sort of region. And some are a little bit further out, so Provence or other parts of Iberia. Narbonne is a town in one of the big towns in southern France. But again, this gives our manuscript its local Catalonian character. Dating saints, I said before that knowledge of saints' days was essential for commercial life. We have actually evidence from medieval England of contracts written in Hebrew. So Hebrew means that it's a contract written from one Jew to another Jew. It's between Jews, but nevertheless included Christian dates. And that's because their transactions involved Christian third parties. If, for example, they had a credit note of a loan from a loan to a Christian, which they wanted to sell to another Jew or to pass on to another Jew. So it's between Jew and Jew, it's written in Hebrew, but the details of the credit note have to be given in the original date. So, and of course, Jews in England are all French speaking, all French. So there we are, until Kadosh Pierre Gul Du of year 6 of the coronation of King Henry. And here's another one, 3 weeks following St. Michael. Note the relative dating. Yes, so you date according to the saint day, or a certain number of days from that date. And here's another one, Monday before Toussaint, before All Saints. Medieval time in Christian society was punctuated basically by these saint days. And dating was made relative to, I grew up in a Catholic country. And in my memory, growing up, this is how Christians counted time. They spoke about saint days and they said, the day before Saint Nicholas, or this is a way they, and this is what you find in these documents. Dating is relative to saint days. It's a kind of sacred time that Jews had to learn and play along with, in spite of all the mockery and cynicism that they would also invest into this. But in a document like this is business. No time for mockery or making fun. You want to get the contract right. So no time for polemics. Just put down Toussaint and finished. Okay, so if I need to stop, I'll stop now. Okay, I'll stop now, but let me just explain very quickly what's on this. Here I'm explaining to you what the Roman calendar is that we find in the Christian calendars, and it has been reproduced over here. And I'm asking, why is it that in all the Christian calendars in Hebrew that we have from France and Germany, you don't have the Roman calendar? And here in our manuscript, or unique manuscript from Catalonia, you do. And I think it's to do with dating practices in Southern Europe. Medieval Southern Europe, they made less use of saint days and more use of the Roman calendar. And there is actually evidence of this in Jewish accounts of moneylenders written in Hebrew, where the transactions have been dated according to the Roman calendar. And there's also evidence of this in Italy, so I think it's a Southern European phenomenon. And on this note, I shall sum up and conclude. We have here in LJS 57 a magnificently produced codex, yet the text is very dry and very scientific. Scholars sometimes make a distinction between scholarly manuscripts, which could be rabbinic, which could be scientific, which are written on cheap paper. The author is only interested in the text, so it's written cheaply and it's only made for study purposes. And then you've got, in contrast to that, medieval manuscripts, which are beautiful, expensive books for public display, maybe the prayer book that was used in the synagogue or that belonged to some wealthy person. What we have in this manuscript is a kind of hybrid, It's a scholarly work, it is a scholarly work, but it's also beautifully produced. So I think it calls into question these neat distinctions between different types of manuscripts, sort of polarized sort of description of manuscripts in the Middle Ages. And the fact that a dry book of astronomy was produced at such great expense and with such amazing illustrations, I think says something about the prestige that was associated with scientific knowledge. So you could have, imagine you could have a Jewish aristocrat or rich person who doesn't know anything about astronomy, but still is prepared to commission or to purchase a manuscript like this without understanding anything of the astronomy, but it's impressive, it's prestigious, it looks good. And also I'm thinking that perhaps astrology was given a certain amount of reverence, which merited these kinds of illustrations and this kind of expense. And then finally, as we have seen, the Christian calendar in Hebrew, with its saint days, opens the window on Jewish engagement with Christianity in late 14th century Spain.
So much for an incredible talk. Let's open the floor to questions. I'll start. talking to the mic because we're recording.
Thank you so much for a fascinating talk. I've looked at this manuscript many times, but never dwelled on the calendar. It's fascinating. I work a lot on Christian books of hours, Christian prayer books that have calendars, and in fact, this week I was teaching students in my class about Christian calendars. And my question is, do you ever encounter, well, two things. So there are these 2 days per month called the Egyptian days, the Dies Aegyptici, I think they're called, which were sort of these Egyptian days, which were sort of bad omen days, a kind of survival into Christianity of some sort of antique superstition. Are those ever, translated, or do those ever appear in the Jewish or the Hebrew renditions of the Christian calendars? And the second question, this is getting a little bit into calendar minutiae, but in the Christian calendars, there are, in the more sort of sophisticated ones, there are octave feast days that are, 8 days after the feast.
Octave.
And are those seem to be more sort of liturgical and less about the sort of holidays or communal days of communal celebration or practice or whatever. Do those get transcribed or not? And could that tell you a little bit about, so this is sort of minutiae about calendars, but I'm very interested. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for these two very specific questions. So the Egyptian days is a system where there are 2 days in the month, which are called Egyptian. And the main application of these days is that you can't let blood. Yes, bloodletting is prohibited on those days. Okay? We keep coming back to medicine. There's no escaping it. Yes. So lo yakiz in Hebrew means he shall not let blood, and that's on the 2nd of February. Now, if you look up in Christian liturgical calendars, you'll find that the 2nd February is one of the standard bloodletting days, and there's another one here, and he's also got additional ones, and also this is beside the Egyptian days, other days when you're not allowed to let blood. If you're asking me where these Egyptian days come from, so they are attested in one calendar, which is a calendar of Philoculus of 354, and scholars say that, oh yes, therefore it goes back to antiquity. I do not believe that, because this calendar of 354 is not a 354, it's a medieval copy from the 9th century. And I think Egyptian days is an early medieval invention. Why are they called Egyptian? Who decides that these dates are the wrong dates for letting blood? I've seen worse even. I've seen days when Jewish calendars telling you that on certain dates, if you do something, then your children will die. But where did they get this from? I don't, no idea. Okay, that's one. And what was the other question?
About whether you get the
Octaves. Yeah, you do get octaves. Yeah, yeah.
All right, I know where everyone's eager to have snacks, so we'll take 2 more questions. First one here.
No. Okay. Thank you. Fascinating talk. Thank you very much. And I wanted to ask you about audience and who are the readers, who are the intended readers, because you said that this is a very, well, we see it, very rich manuscript, but it was produced in a kind of change. It was, you said even fabric, I think. And I was wondering, because it explains, it could be, I mean, my question is, the audience could be also thought not only to prestige, but for training or for practitioners, because you were referring to medicine, and I have to remind us that medicine was a cross-religious practice in the Middle Ages, especially in Catalonia. And also in Catalonia, many of the astrologers working for the king or in the court, they were Jews, so they needed to know. So I was wondering, is something that a practitioner could, use at home or wherever to check, or someone in training could use it also as a mnemotechnic?
So, yeah, so thank you for that question. So at the beginning of the codex, you have some treaties, you know, Abraham ibn Ezra and the Treaty of Astrology. That's just treaties which tell you how to practice astrology and whether people read them or not. I mean, I don't know what use would be made of them. But when you move down the codex and you have all these tables, and I haven't shown you, I mean, it's too boring. You wouldn't, I mean, you go out of your mind, you know, but you know, planetary positions and zodiac positions and ascensions and, you know, all the different positions in the sky and how it works with astrology. Terribly boring. It's just tables of data, one after the next. Those were definitely used for practical, I mean, they were definitely there for practical use. There's no other reason, you know. Most of these tables are basically astronomical in the sense that they are giving you positions of planets, which a scientist has to determine. But they are the raw material that an astrologer then uses for, you know, plotting their charts and whatever it is that they want to do. So it's a sort of astronomical input, which is then taken out by the practitioner. But yes, I think that I'm only hesitating insofar as this is such a beautiful, expensive book that it's not necessarily one that would have fallen in the hands of a practitioner. It could be that it was more like a coffee table book that just was there for people to admire. But as I say, there are signs of wear and tear on this book. So, you know, I think probably people did go through it to pull out the data that they wanted.
Thank you. I want to thank you for communicating really the joy of reading and how to read, how to decode, how to understand, and how to pay the benefit of paying attention to the details of circles and lines around circles and how to read such images. I just want to draw out two things you said and make sure that I just want you to. One of them is explicit. So you have essentially revised your 2016 article. And you are now saying that this phenomenon of Jewish engagement in Hebrew with Christian calendars is more widespread than Northern Europe, and that I think is makes us feel great about the manuscript that we have because it is the sole witness, as far as you've shown us, of all the witnesses. It's the only one outside of Ashkenaz, out of Northern France, Germany. So that's the first point, and I think it's really important for us to know that. In addition to all the cataloging errors, which we'll get right on. The second point I want to ask is more by inference. When you spoke about the factory that manufactures these calendars, and that leads me to wonder, based on what I've been taught, which is that unlike Christian scriptoria, Jews produced Hebrew manuscripts in the Middle Ages, in the medieval time, whatever the right word is. You know, for their own use, and that we find here something that seems to be of a more luxury type of item, but as a luxury item, you wouldn't expect mass production, and so I wonder the word factory and the idea of what exactly do you imagine to be the Jewish place, context, situation? If it's not a scriptorium, then what environment produced this kind of a manuscript? And is there a difference between a calendrical manuscript and a textual literary manuscript? Thank you very much.
You're drawing me into territory where I feel I'm not the biggest expert or the right person to comment. But let me just say that I know at least that, I mean, I've seen very clear evidence of this in the Cairo Gniza, that in Fustat you have definitely factories. In other words, teams of people producing manuscripts. And you see this when you have a manuscript, the cheaper ones even, the ones which they don't care so much about how they look, where the text begins in one script and then changes in the middle to another. And clearly what's happened is that the scribe got tired and gave it over to his colleague next to him, and they didn't really care that it was going to look a bit different. You know, you can see that these things are produced. I have no doubt in my mind, but of course I might be completely wrong, yeah. But in my mind, I have no doubt that, I'm showing the wrong image here, so let's, this is more politically correct, yeah. So you've got here two different manuscripts, but from exactly the same production line. And they are both exactly identical. This can't be the work of a lone person, particularly as they're written in several hands anyway, these manuscripts that we have here. I think that what's happening is that a huge amount of work has been invested in producing this manuscript, and you're quite right to be proud of it. There's a lot to be proud of owning a manuscript like this. A huge amount of work went into designing it, thinking it over, the framework, and I showed you the framework, how the frame in each page is identical, and the use of colors, and there's so much thought has gone into designing this that it would seem a big waste not to make a few copies of it. Once you've got the design, make a few more. It doesn't cost much more to make a few more, and then you can sell them and you can make money from this. That's why I think it is really a commercial operation. It's a large-scale one, and it only so happens that all that has survived is one exemplar, which is the one which is here, and then those loosely bound pages from Vienna.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you again.